when they have finished their testimony. For 3.5 years, they will have the responsibility of witnessing their message. But when they have finished serving as witnesses, they will give up their lives. So God is not allowing their death until their purposes are complete. Right? Once they're done, right? Once they've finished their testimony. The beast that comes up from the bottomless pit, which is something we haven't seen yet. So again, it folds in on itself, and it's not linear. The beast that comes from the bottomless pit will make war on them, will conquer them, and will kill them. And so there will be success on the part of evil. They will succeed in killing them. Now again, interpret this symbolically. It might mean actual death of God's people. It might just be kind of a extreme success kind of thing. Certainly it is God allowing this to happen, but they're successful all the same. But the indignity that the witnesses face isn't just related to death. I mean, you'd think they're dead, that's it. No, the people insult them further by not allowing their bodies to be buried, which would have been a great insult in the ancient world. There's no honor here of them. This is how despised these witnesses are, that they won't give them some basic honor. All of this will take place in the great city. Now, this place is called the great city. We've seen the holy city. So, is it the same place or is it different? Well, John gives a little bit more of a description in this passage, and then we're in verse 8 here. This great city, the name of this great city, is prophetically called, or spiritually called, or allegorically called. I think the translation Darren read from said mystically called. So it's not its real name that John is giving you. But there is something prophetic or allegorical or spiritual. You have to have you have to be spiritual to fully understand what John's saying here. This great city is prophetically called Sodom. All right, so it's prophetically called Sodom. It's not actually Sodom. But by calling it Sodom, it's connecting it with Sodom, suggesting that it has the characteristics of Sodom. So, what characteristics of Sodom would this city have? Yeah, this is the immorality of Sodom. Right? So the great city is an immoral city. Kind of a rebellious, engaged in all sorts of activities that offend God. It is also called Egypt. John, Egypt's not a city, it's a country. Okay, it's prophetically called Egypt, right? So don't get caught up in that. In calling it Egypt, what is being suggested about this city? All right, so the enslavement of God's people, the oppression of God's people. So it's a city that is immoral, it's a city that's oppressive and enslaving. And then John tacks on where also their Lord was crucified. Now, their Lord, the there refers specifically to the witnesses. Now what's interesting here is it appears to be, well, there's a voice that is speaking to John. Probably the voice of God, but it doesn't specifically say this. the voice has said it's their Lord, not your Lord. I don't know if there's anything significant there or not, but it's just kind of, okay, why not say where your Lord was crucified? Because whoever these witnesses are, they have the same Lord as John does. But it's specifically focused on the two witnesses, where their Lord was crucified. Well, who's their Lord? This is also one of those easy ones. Jesus. Where was Jesus crucified? Some of you had to think about that. Jerusalem. Now, some people will say, okay, the great city is the city of Jerusalem. Right? Preterists who think this is about the destruction of Jerusalem. Or even some futurists that think about this has to do with Jerusalem. But it's prophetically called Sodom. It's prophetically called Egypt. Why is it not also prophetically where the Lord was crucified? So identifying Jerusalem here isn't to identify this great city as Jerusalem, but to say just like this city is Sodom, just like it is Egypt, it is also just like Jerusalem. But instead of giving it a name, the emphasis is on they crucified your Lord, they're going to persecute, they're going to kill you as well. Remember, Jesus warned his disciples about those kind of things. Right? If they persecuted me, they are going to persecute you. And so all three of these are prophetic symbols of this great city. This great city is going to be immoral, it's going to be oppressive, and it's going to be a persecutor of God's people. But even if we don't take this as a literal death, we can also kind of take the idea of take up your cross and follow me. Right? And so by the need, we deny ourselves not just because of ourselves. Right? We do need to deny ourselves, die to ourselves because of ourselves, but we die to ourselves for other people as well. And so all of these kind of things are meant to identify it. So ultimately, I think what I think is being symbolized here is the city of Rome, but it's broader than just the city of Rome. Right? It's the approach of the Roman people who persecute the church, suggesting that it's going to be successful. There's going to be a successful persecution of the church. But for 3.5 days. Now the 3.5 days connected with the 3.5 years, right? They minister for 3.5 years, they're killed, they're dead for 3.5 days, suggesting that the period of their death will be shorter than their witnessing. And also an imperfect time, an incomplete time. And so the people of God will witness against the immorality, the oppression. It will appear that they have been stopped. And during that time, right, the members of the people and tribes and languages and nations, again, there's that phrase, we've talked about that figuring in several times, will gaze at their dead bodies, refuse to let them be placed in a tomb. Right? So we're talking about maltreatment, disrespect, utter contempt for the witnesses. It's not just a matter of apathy, it is total disgust at these witnesses. For 3.5 days this will occur. The inhabitants of the earth, those only interested in earthly things, right? I mean, the Christian is an inhabitant of earth and heaven. But these inhabitants of earth, those only interested in earthly things will gloat over them, and they will celebrate and exchange presents. Happy Dead Prophet Day. Got you a blender. I mean, what do you give somebody for Dead Prophet Day? So there's this celebration. Right? The witnesses have died. Right? We don't have to listen to them condemning us anymore. And for 3.5 days will be this celebration. But, because the prophets had been a torment, right? So the torment that they've experienced, they're glad that it is no more. But after the 3.5 days, something will happen. The breath of life will come into them, and they will stand on their feet. What's being symbolized here? Resurrection. Right? That just as Christ was raised, the witnesses will be raised. And here too, I think, I mentioned Ezekiel 37 earlier, just kind of as an example, but I think Ezekiel 37 is behind this. Right? Ezekiel sees the valley of dry bones. The dry bones are made to connect together, and there's ligaments and tendons and then skin, and then the breath of God enters them. And so I think there's that connection as well. And in the context of Ezekiel 37, the Jews in captivity are thinking of themselves as spiritually dead. God has abandoned us, God has left us, we're nothing but a pile of dry bones. And God says to Ezekiel, can these bones live again? The answer being yes. Like God can bring the Jews back to life, spiritually. And what's occurring here, I think, is as well. When it looks like the persecutors have defeated the church, is there any hope? Yes. God will breathe life back into them. They will stand on their feet. But note what the response is from everyone else. They've been gazing so much at their dead bodies, now they see their live bodies, and joy and celebration turn to fear. When what you think has been conquered has suddenly come back to life. And while they're watching the two prophets come back to life, they hear a voice from heaven saying, come up here. Now again, the voice is unidentified, but probably the voice of God or the voice of Christ. And that there will be an escape of the judgment coming. Now, some people believe that this refers to a time period in the future where all living Christians will be raptured from the earth. I don't think that's necessarily what this is talking about, because it's symbolic. Right? And so to take this as a literal event is kind of say, well, this is literal, but everything about it has been symbolic. But instead, by saying they go up into heaven in a cloud, there are a lot of things that are kind of mixed in here with as well. In thinking about the escape of judgment, going up into heaven in a cloud, what ideas do you think of from Bible events or Bible stories? All right, Jesus' ascension is probably the one that's like really on the surface here. Right? Jesus ascends into heaven. He's obscured by a cloud. The apostles are told he's going to come back in the same way. What else can you think of? Yeah, I mean, even though there's not as much with the clouds, Elijah ascending into heaven, and there's the fiery chariot that's along there. And so maybe that as well. The other one I thought of is Paul's encouragement to the Christians at Thessalonica, who were concerned about the dead in Christ. And so the idea about meeting the Lord in the air. So some of these, of course, all have these kind of views of eschatological, right? At the end of time or the end of one's life. And so I certainly think there's a part of that, yes, but it's also a promise of God's deliverance at any point. And so the enemies who had thought they had seen the destruction of the witnesses instead see their vindication. Get to watch them ascend to heaven. But things aren't done yet. The witnesses have been killed, they've come back to life, they've ascended, and then once again, there is a great earthquake. Now again, probably not actual, symbolic. All right, what do earthquakes symbolize? Destruction. What else? Chaos. What else? Anybody been through an earthquake, like a major earthquake? No, maybe. But you know, there's that kind of obviously the fear, but also the feelings of instability. And so this is probably a suggestion of, you know, the people felt confident. The people of the great city felt confident in the great city, and now all of that is being destabilized. God is shaking it. Right? His judgment is taking it apart. So much so, a tenth of the city fell, and 7,000 people were killed. Now, 7,000 people is a tenth of the city, then the population would be about 70,000, which was about the population of Jerusalem in the first century, not Rome. Rome would have been larger. But such a round number as 7,000 just screams out for us symbolic. Right? You know, instead of taking this and multiplying it, you know, this is symbolic of, you know, a complete group of people. And one of the things that I noted in one of the commentaries I was using to prepare for this class is it's kind of a reverse of 1 Kings 19:18. 1 Kings 18, Elijah has that big battle with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. And, you know, Elijah is at the top of his game. God sends fire down on his water-soaked sacrifice and altar and destroys all of it. And Elijah commands the destruction of the prophets of Baal and Asherah. And then flees from Ahab and Jezebel as the rains finally come back. But in 1 Kings 19, things have changed. Elijah's kind of on the run. And he feels like he's the only one left who serves God. And this is where God appears to him as a still small voice. If you don't know what I talk about, you go back and read 1 Kings 19. And you know, asks him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah says, "You know, I'm the only one left." And God tells him, "I have 7,000 people who have not bowed the knee to Baal." Right? And so it's kind of the reverse. Here are 7,000 people who die with respect to the persecutors versus the 7,000 who are faithful in 1 Kings 19. The rest of the people, however, are terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. Is this real? Is this Philippians? Philippians talks about the time coming where every knee's going to bow and confess Jesus as Lord. Is that what's going on? Well, maybe. Or it could be something like what happened with Pharaoh's magicians. For the first of the plagues, the water turning into blood, the frogs, Pharaoh's magicians are able to reproduce the plagues, right, through their magic arts. But when it comes to the gnats, I mean, of all things, gnats, they say, "This is the finger of God." Right? So they recognize God, right? Kind of glorify Him as God, but have they really repented? Have they started following? No. So this is probably what's suggested here. It's a recognition of God's power and recognition of God being God, but it's not, "Let me serve Him now." So there's not true repentance here, but there is kind of this realization of maybe there is something towards this Christian God. We'll go ahead and stop there. We'll pick up with the sounding of the seventh trumpet and then move into chapter 12 on Thursday.